Hey now, what is up, everybody? My name is Mike Brown, aka Review King MB, and Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones was a very popular show on HBO. It was based off of the books written by George R. Martin, and this was something that when this show was first brought up to me and what it was about, set in these olden times with characters involving supernatural stuff, but it was all revolving this Iron Throne, and they were all fighting for it. I thought, okay, it sounds interesting, but I never thought it would be up my alley. I never thought that I could fully commit and get into it. Somewhere around season 2 or 3, I decided to give it a shot. I watched the first episode and I was hooked. I was hooked by the writing, I was hooked by the actors, I was hooked by the characters, and I was hooked by the mood, the atmosphere, the tone, the world building, how serious they presented the story, how serious they presented these characters and their backstories. I just had to see what happened next, and I think that's what we enjoyed. The twists, the turns, the unpredictable nature of these characters and where they went and where the stories went. Hell, this show became notorious for killing off every fan favorite, every major character. At least my favorite characters were pretty much all killed off at some point throughout this whole series. I'm still trying to get over Ned Stark being beheaded like he was in season 1. That shocked me to this day. It's just one of those moments where you don't get that in TV shows anymore. Shows that were daring, were risk taking, that they were willing to take the story in a direction that just you had no idea where they would go next. Robb Stark, the son of Ned Stark, being the one who vowed to avenge his father's death, him and his wife, and she was pregnant, and just him looking like he was going to be the hero of the story. Catelyn Stark, the mother, leading this along the way, and then the Red Wedding. This has now become infamous. People reference saying that this is the Red Wedding of whatever show that you're talking about because that's what this was. This was the death of more major characters, the death of essentially the heroes of the story before the story was even done. It might be one of the most shocking moments, not only of this show but in TV in general. And then it was the politics. It was the backstabbing. It was the families not trusting each other and having to work together, all for this Iron Throne. It was all very intriguing. It was all very interesting. The way how every character was weaving into the certain families, the Seven Kingdoms, also the supernatural aspect of dragons existing, of the White Walkers being out there, and how seldom they used them. But then when they did show up, it meant something. It was scary, it was impactful. This show had a lot of strengths. This show moved at a great pace. This show took the time and care and effort when it needed to establish characters, to establish situations before shit hit the fan. Also, I talk about the Stark family and how important they were, how much of the heroes they were. But what about the Lannisters? The Lannisters, who were the villains, who were the bad guys for the most part, they were not only so successful, they just prevailed each and every season that you almost became enamored with them because of how good they were. But not just that, we're talking about characters like Cersei Lannister, who was evil, absolutely evil. She pretty much stayed evil and rotten to the core. She too had layers to her because like the season where she got taken in by the cult and shamed and tortured and imprisoned, and so you kind of felt for her after that, and her rebounding to get back to that position of power was quite impressive, even though once again she was bad. Her incestual relationship with her brother, Jaime Lannister, is something that still is bizarre to this day because not only were they, yes, they were blood brother and sister, and they were sleeping together, they were in love with each other, they birthed children together, and you saw how the society felt about it, how much it was against everyone's uh, initial way of life, and how that threatened their positions of power. And it was odd, it was weird, but it was once again fascinating to watch. Tyrion Lannister, who is their brother, but he's a midget. He's played by Peter Dinklage, who did a great job. At the beginning, he just comes off as this drunk or a guy who sleeps with women and didn't really have care for the world. He became somebody who wanted to prove that he wasn't as evil as his family. He didn't like his last name anymore. He wanted to show that he was more than that. And so all of these characters just multi-layered, multifaceted. Sansa Stark, somebody who it's funny now to look back and see just how unlikable Sansa was at the beginning. I don't know if it was the actress Sophie Turner not being as good, or if the material, the writing for her specifically, if they purposely didn't want to make her all that interesting, because she wasn't really all that interesting. She was a little annoying. It's not until where she gets taken and raped and really abused, because for a while she seemed like she was maybe protected, or she seemed like she didn't really earn any sympathy that the story wanted us to have for her. It wasn't until she was raped, it wasn't until she was put in some horrible environments to where we felt bad for her. And then coming out of that, she became a survivor. She became strong, and she just became more believable in that role. There was a switch, there was a change somewhere around maybe season 6 where Sansa Stark became one of my favorites. And then her sister Arya Stark, she witnesses her father's beheading at the beginning. She's very young. She runs off and she has an arc being protected almost by this character, the Hound. Their relationship proved to be very important to her, the hardening of her as a character. And then she went through her own arc, where the girl with no name, with many faces, and some people might think that that was a little random or not as necessary, but I still find it to be fascinating to see a little girl basically stripped away of her innocence, be stripped away of something that normally would make her more of a person, and make her more of a cold-blooded killer, make her be more willing to do things that most characters, especially a Stark, wouldn't be able to do. Hell, we even see her lose her virginity in the last season, which was very odd because this actress, we watched her since she was a little girl. And so seeing her there, it shows the growth. But let's not forget. I could skip ahead and talk about the last season. I could talk about how rushed it was, and it was. I could talk about how bad certain things were, and they were. But let us not forget that there still were some disappointing things from those first couple seasons. I'm talking about Cal Drago, who was a great character, at least in initially. At least from what we could tell, Jason Momoa looked like a badass, had a presence to him, was intimidating. He was the leader of his own army. He took Daenerys Targaryen as his wife, essentially, raped her. Sure, she eventually, I guess, got along with him, but still, he looked like a force to be reckoned with, and then he just gets sick and dies. And I still to this day go, wow, that's almost a waste of a badass character that I still think we could have done a whole lot more with. What about Joffrey? Joffrey the son of Cersei, he became the king very early on, at a very young age. In fact, he's the one who orders the kill of Ned Stark. He's the one who does a lot of heinous things. Because he's a kid, it was disturbing to see someone that young get so power hungry, so roped into how they could just do whatever they wanted. And I couldn't wait to see this character die. I couldn't wait to see him get what he deserved. And then he just randomly dies at the very beginning of season 4. He gets poisoned. And look, I'm glad he was killed, but man, I could have gotten a much better death for him. I could have seen somebody really take it to him, really get their revenge in a way that probably should have been done. And also, I mentioned earlier Cersei Lannister being taken by this crazy religious cult and tortured, and sure, it provided some great quotable lines and moments from the series, and sure, it gave Cersei some layers to her that she didn't have before. But overall, I thought the cult thing was a little weird, or just something that I didn't care a whole lot about, and also I didn't like how their storyline was a big part of Masande's death, a character that I thought was interesting and thought they could have done a lot more with as well. Even with those minor complaints, though, we got some great characters and great villains post this this era, like Ramsay. Ramsay, somebody that made it possible that there was somebody out there who was worse than Joffrey. Showed us that there was somebody who could do some deplorable things. Him torturing Theon. Theon, a character that I did not give two craps about beforehand. A character who he too did some bad things, but man, seeing him get castrated, seeing him just be uh, treated like crap. He was Reek, for crying out loud. That was hard to watch. That just made Ramsay that much more of a villain. And he, like I said, he rapes Sansa. He does a lot of bad things to her. The Battle of the Bastards still goes down to this day as one of the best episodes of the show. Just the way it was shot, it was very cinematic, and the whole episode pretty much was the battle. I would argue that it rivals any battle that you would see in something like Lord of the Rings or anything along those lines. It's just great stuff. And the death of Ramsay was very satisfying, seeing him get killed by his own dogs. Littlefinger was another character that I was so satisfied, so happy to see get his get his comeuppance. Somebody who had been around since day one, and he was manipulating people. He was using people. He was doing things behind people's back to service himself, to keep himself alive. He caused a lot of the Stark family to get killed off, and so his death was long awaited, very much anticipated. And this is what I liked about it. Sure, the first 4 seasons or so, since they were based off of George R. R. Martin's books, and since they were told in a new way of, hey, the good guys don't always win. Yes, that was very innovative, that was very surprising, that was very different, but it came a point where it was becoming dire. It was becoming sad to watch the show because you just felt like there was no happy ending in sight. And then when they did surpass Martin's books, when they did go too far past the books and they started to do their own thing, I applauded seeing some good things happen. I applauded seeing the good people finally win. These are perfect examples of that. The White Walkers, I talked about how they were in the background, they showed up when they had to, they had their episodes. We come to the last season where our payoff is to see what's going to happen. It was built up, it was talked about. Will this show end with the White Walkers killing everyone? Will this show have an ending where everybody left are White Walkers? That episode was very intense. I remember being very scared for certain characters, not knowing what would happen. But the biggest complaints that came out of that White Walker battle episode were people saying that it was just too dark. And they're not wrong. At first, I thought it was an on purpose thing where maybe they wanted us to be in the character's point of view to not exactly see everything and not know what's going on. But then, no, you find out that the cinematographer, even himself, complained that, yeah, it wasn't supposed to be that dark, that something happened with the editing, it just got completely screwed up. And so that's a bummer because that should not have happened. And you could argue that no major characters died in that episode, and they should have. This was a big moment. This was something. This was a serious threat that should have been paid off. I still think that maybe Sam, as much as I like the Sam character, maybe he or somebody else big should have been killed. There was so many moments of characters who were surrounded by White Walkers or who were put in situations where they clearly should have died. There was no way out and they somehow got out of it. It's okay to do that once in a while, but when you did it like 5 or 6 times, it became a little forced. It became a little too much to believe. Hell, the White Walkers had an ice dragon. They killed one of Daenerys' dragons and they resurrected it to become an ice dragon. Remember how cool that was? Remember how crazy that was? We couldn't wait to see what would happen with that. You could argue that maybe not enough was done with that either. But the very end sees Arya Stark kill the Night King. The Night King was somebody that never quite got uh, as much of a backstory as he could have, never quite fully understood what the motivations were. Maybe that's the point. Maybe we were never supposed to know. Some people think that Arya isn't believable to being the one that would kill the Night King like this. I was very happy with it. I bought it. I bought that she had trained herself. That's what her whole arc has been for, is to be ready to be the one to end this and to be the hero of that story. Although maybe you could have culminated this battle in a bigger way or a much better way. Jaime Lannister, I talk about how he is in love with his own sister and how creepy and gross that is, and yes, it is. But he too had an arc over the course of multiple seasons where he realized that his sister had gone too far. Where he realized that his sister was doing too much evil in the world and that she was coming to a point where she had to be dealt with. And it looked to me like Jaime Lannister was going to have to be the one to kill his own sister. For some reason, Jaime Lannister develops a mini relationship with Brienne of Tarth, and they sleep together. They supposedly fall for each other, but then he leaves Brienne. So this just was for the course of a couple episodes, I guess. But he leaves her to go back for Cersei, which you figure maybe that's a lie. Maybe he's just saying this so that nobody knows what he's really going to do, that he really is going to go over there and kill his sister, do what no one else can do, get close to her, and you're waiting for Jaime to come full circle to make that arc to redeem himself 100%. But no, he goes back and he really is still in love with Cersei, which is fine, but he doesn't plan on killing her. He just plans to go back there and save her and protect her, which seemed very underwhelming for him. But speaking of underwhelming, Cersei Lannister, one of the biggest villains, possibly the biggest villain of the series, somebody who has done some dastardly things, some heinous things, things that you want to see her get killed. You want to see her have a death that's similar to Ramsay. You want to see, or Littlefinger, you want to see her just get what's coming to her. But all that really happens is that she confesses to Jaime that she's afraid to die. She's pregnant, of course. And the two of them just hold each other as bricks and rocks fall on them, as debris falls all around them, and then they die instantly. And I couldn't have been any more underwhelmed by a character's death, by a villain's death, than I was when I saw that. But let's talk about possibly the biggest crime that this show maybe committed. Daenerys Targaryen. She was, without a doubt, probably my second favorite character of the series. She came from a mad family, her father, the Mad King, her brother, who did some horrible things to her as well. She was raped, she was sold, she was a survivor from that. She led her own army. She came out of this going to the different kingdoms, trying to take out as many horrible, unruly leaders as possible. She became a symbol, a figure for people to stand behind, believe in, trust. She was the mother of the dragons. She did have this sense of power because of those dragons, but she was a woman of her word. She came through when it came down to doing the right thing and having the right people around her to steer her in the right direction. I'm not saying that where she goes at the end of this series is a place that she never should have gone. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the explanation for why she turns evil uh, wasn't really there. It was very rushed. This whole arc for her was very rushed, very thrown together, very sad to see because I think the character deserved better than that. Her falling in love with Jon Snow, but then the two of them finding out that they're related, that they're aunt and nephew, is very weird. But what's more weird is that they didn't have more of a negative reaction to it. They just kind of said to themselves, "Oh, okay, we're related, but that's okay. Let's just keep having sex." Even though the show did such a big deal of making us feel gross about the Lannisters, which trust me, we still do. But I don't know. I don't know why it was okay for the Targaryens to have incest. I guess it just matters in which family you're in. But once again, Daenerys going mad, sort of seemingly randomly, going around killing innocent people. The scene where she's on her dragon flying around and burning the village down and burning people alive. It's hard to watch, and it's mostly hard to watch because you don't understand why her character would go to such dark, dark places. This last season, especially, riddled with horrible, horrible errors. I'm not talking about writing wise or story wise, although that's very much there. I'm talking about the Starbucks cup. I'm talking about the water bottle. I'm talking about production mistakes or directing mistakes. Like, how does that stuff get lost in the shuffle? How does anyone not notice that stuff being on camera, being in scene? It's very weird. It's very awkward, but yet it's all over the screen. It's one of those things where it makes you feel like the last season was rushed. It makes you feel like Benioff and Weiss, the two showrunners who took this over from George R. R. Martin, they just wanted to end the show. They didn't take the time, effort, and care that had previously been done to the show before. It just seemed like a rush job. It seemed like we just need to get this show done and over with. John being forced to kill Daenerys the way that he did, once again, just felt very paint by numbers, very predictable. Jon Snow and Tyrion were imprisoned for this because they kind of plotted behind her back to kill her, although they're later set free because I guess everyone realized that Daenerys was batshit crazy and maybe deserved it. This whole show, this whole series was based off of the Iron Throne. Who would get the Iron Throne? Who would sit in that Iron Throne? It was all very important. It was all very much what the show is about. And then what happens? They just destroy it. They destroy the throne. After Daenerys dies, her dragon destroys the throne. Essentially, the dragon saying, "F this mess. This throne wasn't worth all of the heartache and headache that has come with it." And sure, that makes sense as far as why it would happen, but I still don't think that that was a satisfying ending for us, the viewers. We should have seen somebody sit in the throne. We should have seen somebody taken over of that throne. It was built up for so long. To just have it be destroyed seemed like a big misstep, a big missed opportunity. But speaking of that, this might be one of the most disappointing and randomest decisions probably of all time. Bran Stark. Bran Stark was always a character that I was sort of lukewarm about. Sure, early on, he was a young kid, 7 or 8 years old. He witnesses, he catches the Lannisters having sex, so Jamie tosses him out the window and he's paralyzed from this point forward. He's protected by the character Hodor, but he has this arc of becoming the three-eyed raven. He's having these visions of the past and the future, and he's figuring out all of this very random backstory and very random set of scenes that I honestly was never thrilled with Bran. I thought he was I don't want to say annoying, but he just was always there. Every time they cut to him, I just sort of felt like he existed. He was there. He was cannon fodder. He was filler. And then the more we went on, the more we realized that he was losing his emotions. He had no real emotions left, no human emotions left. He was just very weird in certain scenes, just not talking all the time and just sitting there and just I don't know, I just never connected to this character like I think I was supposed to because the very last episode he becomes the king of the Seven Kingdoms. What? You couldn't get more left field. You couldn't get more disappointed thinking that's the character that we decided to throw all the power on. That's a character that we decided to trust. I remember people having more interesting theories on where his character was going as far as being mentally connected to the Night King. That didn't pay off. Or just as far as maybe a twist with him or having some other supernatural explanation for why he is who he is. And none of that really plays out. It just, I left the last episode disappointed. I have seen a lot of almost the calling of the heads of Benioff and Weiss. I just think that this should have been a lot better. I think for where this show started, for what this show established, for what this show was able to accomplish, and the popularity that it gained, it just sucks that where it ended up going just didn't quite hold up to where it could have gone. This could have been gone down as one of the greatest shows of all time, and even for people who were upset with where it went post season 5 because it was away from the books, that it did have a more traditional sense of storytelling, which I thought was fine. Even with that, I think people would have been a lot more forgiving and they would have been a lot more into it still if this last season had a better conclusion, had a better payoff, had a better setup, wasn't as rushed as it was, didn't treat some of these characters the way that they did. I think it's sad now that now the legacy of Game of Thrones will always be, well, it was good until the ending. Now Game of Thrones, I see some people say that it has possibly the worst season or the worst finale of any show that they've ever seen. And it's hard to argue. Honestly, it's hard to argue. So guys, let me know in the comments below, what do you think of Game of Thrones and where it went wrong? Do you think it happened around season 5 when they veered away from the books initially? Or do you think it all started with season 8 because it was rushed, because Benioff and Weiss slacked off, because they didn't have a real ending or a cohesive end goal for these characters, for the story like they should have? Thanks for listening. Like, comment, subscribe. Later.